Have you ever felt like you were just an ordinary person? Maybe you've wondered if God could ever use someone like you to do something special. Well, I want to tell you about two incredible women from the Bible. Their names are Ruth and Esther. Now, they weren't queens from birth, and they weren't famous prophets either. Honestly, they were, in so many ways, just like you and me. They faced sadness, they felt fear, and they had to make some really tough choices. Yet, through their simple faith and their brave hearts, God worked in the most beautiful ways. Their stories aren't just old tales. They're love letters from God, reminding us that He sees us, He loves us, and He has a wonderful plan for our lives, no matter how ordinary we might feel. Their journeys were very different, set in different times and places, but they shared something truly powerful, a deep trust in God. Ruth was a young woman who lost everything, yet she chose to hold on to loyalty and hope. Esther was a young queen who found herself in a position of great power, but she had to risk it all for her people. Both of them show us that our circumstances do not define us. What truly matters is our response to God's gentle call on our hearts. He doesn't always ask for grand gestures. Sometimes He just asks for a willing spirit, a trusting soul, and a heart that's open to His love and guidance. As we walk through their stories together, I want you to see yourself in them. See Ruth's loyalty when she chose to care for her mother-in-law, Naomi. See Esther's courage when she decided to speak up, even though she was terrified. Their lives teach us that God is always working behind the scenes. He is weaving a beautiful tapestry, and even the threads that look dark or tangled are part of His masterpiece. He can take our moments of loss and turn them into seasons of blessing. He can use our moments of fear to show His incredible strength. These stories are here to fill your heart with hope. So, let's begin this journey with open hearts. Let's listen to the whispers of God in the lives of Ruth and Esther. Let's be inspired to live with the same kind of faith and courage. Remember, God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. He chose Ruth, a foreigner from Moab. He chose Esther, an orphan girl. He chose them not because they were perfect, but because they were willing. And my dear friend, He chooses you too, right where you are, to be a part of His amazing plan. Let their stories be a gentle reminder of the extraordinary things God can do through an ordinary life surrendered to Him. Ruth's story begins not with joy, but with deep sadness. She was a young woman from a land called Moab, and she had married a man from Israel. But a terrible tragedy struck her family. Her husband, her brother-in-law, and her father-in-law all passed away. She was left alone with her mother-in-law, Naomi, and her sister-in-law, Orpah. Their hearts were broken, filled with the emptiness that loss brings. Naomi, feeling that God had dealt bitterly with her, decided to return to her homeland of Bethlehem. She told her daughters-in-law to go back to their own families, where they might find new husbands and new lives. It was the sensible thing to do, the logical choice. Orpah, with tears in her eyes, kissed Naomi goodbye and returned to her people and her gods. But Ruth did something truly remarkable. She clung to Naomi. She refused to leave her. Naomi urged her again, telling her to follow Orpah. But Ruth's heart was filled with a powerful love and a steadfast loyalty that went beyond family ties. She spoke words that have echoed through centuries, words of pure devotion. She said to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." This was more than just a promise. It was a profound declaration of faith. Think about what Ruth was giving up. She was leaving behind her home, her culture, and everything she had ever known. She was choosing to go to a foreign land as a poor widow, a place where she might not be welcomed. She was choosing a future of uncertainty with an older woman who had nothing to offer her but her own grief. Yet in that moment of decision, Ruth was not just choosing Naomi. She was choosing Naomi's God. She was placing her trust not in what she could see, but in the unseen God of Israel, the God of love and faithfulness. Her loyalty was a beautiful act of faith in itself. This decision shows us the incredible power of a faithful heart. Sometimes, the most spiritual thing we can do is to simply be loyal to the people God has placed in our lives. It is to love when it is hard, to stay when it is easier to leave, and to trust that God will honor our commitment. Ruth's journey to Bethlehem was not just a physical one, it was a spiritual pilgrimage. She walked away from her past and towards a future held in the loving hands of God. She didn't know what lay ahead, But she knew she was not alone. She had Naomi by her side, and she had a newfound faith in a God who sees the humble and lifts up the broken-hearted. When Ruth and Naomi arrived in Bethlehem, they had nothing. They were two widows with no source of income, and their future looked bleak. The barley harvest was just beginning, and according to the law in Israel, the poor were allowed to follow behind the harvesters and gather the leftover grain. This was called gleaning, and it was hard, humble work. Without hesitation, Ruth told Naomi that she would go to the fields and work. She was not afraid of the labor or the lowliness of the task. Her love for Naomi gave her the strength and determination to do whatever it took to provide for them. She set out with a humble spirit, trusting that God would lead her to a field where she would find favor. By what seemed like a simple chance, Ruth found herself working in a field that belonged to a man named Boaz. But honestly, we know that with God, there are no simple chances. God's loving hand was guiding her every step. Boaz was a kind and respected man, and he was also a relative of Naomi's late husband. When he came to his field, he immediately noticed Ruth. He saw her diligence and her gentle spirit. He asked his workers who she was, and they told him she was the Moabite woman who had come back with Naomi, a woman who had shown great loyalty. Boaz was touched by her story and her character. Boaz approached Ruth and spoke to her with incredible kindness. He told her not to go to any other field, but to stay close to his workers. He offered her protection and told her she could drink from the water jars his men had filled. Ruth was overwhelmed by his generosity. She fell at his feet and asked him why he was being so kind to her, a foreigner. Boaz replied that he had heard all about her loyalty to Naomi, how she had left her own family and country to care for her. He prayed a blessing over her, saying, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth's hard work and humble heart had opened a door to God's provision. She went home that evening with more grain than she could have ever hoped for, and she shared it all with Naomi. When Naomi heard that Ruth had been in the field of Boaz, her heart was filled with renewed hope. She recognized God's faithfulness in this wonderful turn of events. She saw that God had not forgotten them in their sorrow. Through Ruth's simple act of going to work, God had set in motion a beautiful plan of redemption and blessing. It reminds us that God often meets us in our daily work, rewarding our faithfulness in small things with his incredible provision. In the story of Ruth, Boaz is much more than just a kind man. He is a beautiful picture of Jesus. In the Old Testament, there was a special tradition called a kinsman redeemer. This was a male relative who had the responsibility to look after a family member in need. If a person had to sell their land because of poverty, the kinsman redeemer could buy it back. If a woman's husband died without leaving any children, the kinsman redeemer could marry the widow to continue the family line. He was a figure of hope, rescue and restoration. Boaz was this figure for Ruth and Naomi. He had the power to redeem them from their poverty and their loneliness. We see this redeeming quality in every action Boaz takes. He did not just allow Ruth to glean in his field, he went above and beyond to care for her. He provided her with protection, ensuring that no one would harm her. He shared his food with her, inviting her to eat with him and his workers. He even commanded his men to purposely leave behind extra stalks of grain for her to gather. This is a beautiful illustration of God's grace. God doesn't just give us what we need to survive. He lavishes us with his goodness and his blessings, far more than we could ever earn or deserve. Boaz's generosity was a reflection of the generous heart of our Heavenly Father. Just as Boaz saw Ruth when she was a poor foreign widow with nothing to offer, Jesus sees us in our spiritual poverty. Before we come to know him, we are lost and without hope. We are outsiders, separated from the family of God. But Jesus, our Redeemer, looks upon us with compassion and love. He doesn't see our unworthiness. He sees a person he loves dearly. He invites us into his family. He paid the ultimate price to redeem us, not with money or land, but with his own life on the cross. He rescues us from the emptiness of our past and gives us a new identity and a new future in him. When Boaz eventually marries Ruth, he fully redeems her. She is no longer Ruth the foreigner, the poor widow. She becomes Ruth, the beloved wife of Boaz, a respected member of the community. Her sadness is turned into incredible joy. This is what Jesus does for us. When we accept his love, we are brought into his family. We are no longer defined by our past mistakes or our feelings of being an outsider. We are children of God, co-heirs with Christ. Boaz gave Ruth a secure future and a family. Jesus gives us an eternal future and a place in the family of God forever. He is our true kinsman redeemer who lifts us up and calls us his own. Now let us turn our hearts to another remarkable woman, Esther. Her story is one of dazzling heights and, honestly, terrifying dangers. Esther was a young Jewish girl who was an orphan, raised by her loving cousin Mordecai. She was living in Persia, far from her ancestral home of Israel, because her people had been taken into exile. Esther was known for being very beautiful, but, her true beauty was really in her character and her spirit. Through a series of events that only God could arrange, the powerful King Xerxes was looking for a new queen. He held a great contest, and out of all the young women in the kingdom, he chose Esther to be his queen. It was a true rags-to-riches story. Esther was now in the palace, surrounded by luxury and power. On the advice of her cousin Mordecai, she kept her Jewish identity a secret. For a time, her life was peaceful, but God had placed her in that palace for a reason she could not yet see. She was not there just to be a beautiful queen. She was there for a much higher purpose. Her position was not an accident. It was a divine appointment. God often places us in specific situations, not for our own comfort or glory, but so that we can be a source of help and hope to others at just the right time. Esther's quiet life was about to be turned upside down. A wicked and prideful man named Haman rose to power in the kingdom. He was the king's highest official, and he demanded that everyone bow down to him. But Mordecai, being a faithful Jew, would only bow to God. This refusal filled Haman with a furious rage. His hatred for Mordecai was so intense that he decided he would not just destroy Mordecai, but all the Jewish people throughout the entire Persian Empire. He deviously tricked the king into signing a decree that on a certain day, all Jews, men, women, and children, were to be killed. A dark cloud of terror and despair fell over the Jewish people. This is where Esther's true test of courage begins. She is safe in the palace, a queen beloved by the king. She could have stayed silent. She could have tried to protect herself by keeping her identity a secret. Revealing that she was a Jew would put her own life in grave danger. Approaching the king without being summoned was forbidden, an offense punishable by death unless the king held out his golden scepter. Esther was faced with an impossible choice: stay silent and let her people perish, or risk her own life to save them. It was a moment that would define her life, and really, the fate of her entire nation. When Mordecai heard about the terrible decree, he was filled with grief. He sent a message to Esther, telling her of Haman's evil plan and urging her to go before the king to plead for her people. At first, Esther was overwhelmed with fear, and who could blame her? She sent a message back to Mordecai reminding him of the law. Anyone who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned is put to death, she said. She had not been called to see the king for 30 days. Her fear was real and understandable. She felt powerless, caught between a deadly law and a deadly decree. Her position as queen seemed to offer no real protection at all. Mordecai's reply to Esther was powerful and profound. He sent back a message that would change her heart. He said, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" These words were a divine wake-up call for Esther. She realized that her position was not a coincidence. It was a sacred trust from God. It was her moment to act. Esther's fear did not simply vanish, but she found a source of strength that was greater than her fear. She made a decision rooted in faith and courage. She sent a final message to Mordecai, saying, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do." Before she would face the king, she would first go before God. She understood that this was not a battle she could win with her own strength or wisdom. She needed divine help. Fasting and prayer were her weapons. It was an act of complete dependence on God. In that decision, Esther surrendered her life into God's hands. She ended her message with the brave and selfless words, "When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Her fear was still there, but her faith was now leading the way. She chose to identify with her people in their suffering and to trust God with the outcome, no matter what it might be. This is honestly a powerful lesson for us. When we face our own impossible situations, the first and most important thing we can do is to turn to God in prayer, trusting that He will give us the wisdom and courage we need to take the next step. After 3 days of fasting and prayer, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace. This was the moment of truth. Her heart must have been pounding in her chest as she waited, her life hanging in the balance. When the king saw her, God granted her favor in His sight. He was pleased to see her and held out His golden scepter, a sign of His acceptance. The king asked her what she wanted, promising to give her up to half of his kingdom. But Esther, guided by God's wisdom, did not reveal her request right away. Instead, she simply invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. At the first banquet, the king again asked Esther for her request, but she wisely delayed once more, inviting them to a second banquet the next day. This delay was part of God's perfect timing. That very night, the king could not sleep. A small, seemingly insignificant detail, yet it was God at work. To pass the time, he asked for the book of the Chronicles, the official records of his reign, to be read to him. The part that was read told of how Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate the king, saving his life. The king asked, "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" The answer was, "Nothing has been done for him." The very next morning, the wicked Haman arrived at the palace. He had spent the night building a huge gallows 75 feet high, on which he planned to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai. But before Haman could speak, the king asked him a question. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman, in his arrogance, thought the king was talking about him, so he described a lavish ceremony. The man should be dressed in the king's royal robes, placed on the king's own horse, and led through the city streets, while a noble prince proclaims, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Imagine Haman's shock and horror when the king commanded him, "Go at once, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew." Haman had to honor the very man he was about to destroy. God had turned the tables in the most dramatic way, using Haman's own pride to exalt Mordecai and humiliate Haman. This incredible reversal shows that God is always in control. He works in ways we cannot predict, orchestrating events to protect His people and to bring about His perfect justice. He can take the enemy's evil plans and turn them into a testimony of His power and faithfulness. The stories of Ruth and Esther, though separated by time and circumstance, are filled with powerful lessons that speak directly to our hearts today. One of the most beautiful themes is that God is always at work, even when we cannot see Him. In the book of Ruth, God's name is mentioned, but His actions are subtle. He works through the loyalty of a young woman, the kindness of a landowner, and the customs of a community. In the book of Esther, God's name is not mentioned even once, yet His presence is felt on every single page. His unseen hand guides a queen, causes a king to have a sleepless night, and orchestrates a perfect reversal of justice. This teaches us that God is always sovereignly working for our good, even in the quiet, ordinary moments of our lives. Both women teach us that faith and courage can make an extraordinary difference. Ruth's faith was shown in her quiet loyalty and her willingness to work hard in a foreign land. Esther's courage was shown in her willingness to risk her life to speak truth to power. Neither of them were superheroes. They were real women who felt loss and fear. But they chose to act in faith despite their feelings. They teach us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're afraid. Our small acts of faith and bravery, when surrendered to God, can have an impact far greater than we can ever imagine. Perhaps the most hopeful lesson from their lives is that God can turn our deepest sorrow into our greatest joy. Ruth began her story as a grieving, childless widow in a foreign land. She ended her story as a cherished wife, a mother, and a direct ancestor of King David, and ultimately of Jesus Christ himself. Her emptiness was filled beyond measure. Esther began her story as an orphan girl and faced the potential annihilation of her people. She ended her story as a savior to her nation, and her people celebrated their deliverance with a festival of great joy called Purim, which is still celebrated today. God is in the business of redemption. He can take our broken pieces and create something beautiful. These stories remind us that God uses ordinary people to accomplish his extraordinary purposes. He chose a widow from Moab and an orphan girl in exile. He didn't choose the strongest, the wealthiest, or the most powerful in the world's eyes. He chose humble individuals with willing hearts. This should fill us with great encouragement. It means that God can use you. He can use your unique story, your strengths, and even your weaknesses to be a blessing to others and to bring glory to his name. You don't have to be perfect or have it all together. You just have to be willing to say yes to his loving call on your life. My dear friend, as we come to the end of our time with Ruth and Esther, I hope their stories have touched your heart with a message of enduring hope. Life can be difficult. We all face times of loss, uncertainty, and fear. There may be moments when you feel like Naomi, that life has dealt you a bitter hand. There may be times when you feel like Esther, facing an impossible situation where you feel small and powerless. In these moments, remember these two faithful women. Remember how God was with them, guiding them, protecting them, and weaving their stories into his grand and beautiful plan of redemption for all of us. Let their lives encourage you to trust God, especially when you cannot trace his hand. When the future seems dark, remember Ruth, who chose loyalty and faith in the face of an uncertain future, and trust that God is leading you to your own field of blessing. When you are called to do something brave that frightens you, remember Esther, who found her strength in prayer and fasting, and trust that God will give you the courage you need for such a time as this. Your life, right now, is your such a time as this. God has placed you where you are for a purpose. He sees you, he loves you, and he is with you in every single step of your journey. So how can we live like Ruth and Esther today? We can start by cultivating a loyal heart. Look for ways to be faithful to the people God has placed in your life. Show kindness, offer support, and love unconditionally. We can also choose courage over comfort. Is there a place where God is asking you to speak up for what is right? Is there a fear he is asking you to face with his help? Start with small steps. And most importantly, we can deepen our trust in God through prayer. Like Esther, bring your fears and your impossible situations to him before you do anything else. Trust that he hears you and that he is working all things together for your good. Before we part, I want to leave you with a couple of questions to carry in your heart. Think about a time when things were hard for you. How did God show his faithfulness? Remembering his past help can build your faith for the future. And then ask yourself, how can I be brave for God today? It may not be saving a nation, but it might be forgiving someone, sharing a word of hope, or simply trusting him with that one thing that worries you most. May the stories of Ruth and Esther inspire you to live each day with a heart full of faith, a spirit full of courage, and a life that shines brightly with the incredible love of God. You are an angel in training. God bless you.